The storm began not in the void of space, but in the arrogance of those who believed themselves untouchable. The Eternals, as they demanded the galaxy call them, had ruled for centuries. Their ships glowed like suns. Their voices carried with mechanical echoes as if the universe itself amplified their words. Every lesser species obeyed, bowed, or bled. They were not content to be rulers. They wanted worshippers. They wanted every living thing to kneel and whisper their names as though they were carved into the bones of creation. Humans were late comers to this stage. The Earth Union had clawed its way out of its wars, its hunger, its endless infighting, and dragged itself into the stars with the bitterness of survivors. For decades, humans had kept quiet, pretending to be too small, too fragile to attract attention, but silence has limits. The first time the Eternals demanded Earth kneel, demanding tribute and bodies for servitude, the Union sent envoy. The envoys were returned as ash, scattered across orbiting space like dust thrown into the wind. That act burned itself into the hearts of human commanders, and one man, Captain Harlow of the warship Iron Rain, took it personally. The Iron Rain was not the largest ship humanity possessed. It was not the fastest nor the most advanced, but it was old, scarred, and built from an era where survival meant brutality. Its armor was thick enough to wade through hellfire, its engines overclocked to the point of near suicidal strain. It was less a warship and more a grudge. Made of steel, Harlow stood at the bridge, his knuckles whitening on the railing as the Eternals' fleet hung in the distance like a constellation made of cruelty. Their ships were smooth, white, gleaming with the arrogance of beings who never expected to bleed. Their voices filled the calm, every word drenched in contempt. You are fragile things pretending at war. We have seen your kind before. Always the same, breeding, fighting, dying. We are forever. Kneel, and we will let some of you live long enough to remember your weakness. The crew of the Iron Rain listened in silence. No one laughed, no one cursed. They simply looked to Harlow, waiting. He had buried friends, watched colonies burn, seen the bodies of envoys turned to ash. His silence was heavier than their threats. Then he gave the order that would etch itself into history. Lock guns, all of them. The first volley tore through the void like the roar of an ancient beast, finally uncaged. Human weapons didn't glow like the Eternals. They didn't sing with elegance. They screamed, spitting slugs of hyperdense metal at speeds that ripped reality itself. One Eternal ship, massive, untouchable, warped as a temple in half a dozen star systems, crumpled under the barrage, its white hull cracking, spilling fire into the void. It burned, and it kept burning. The Eternals had never seen fire in space. Their technology erased it before it began. Watching one of their immortal vessels twist in flames sent a ripple of silence across the comms. Harlow leaned forward, his voice low, meant only for his crew, but carried through the ship like thunder. Gods don't bleed, but they will. The second volley made sure of it. Another Eternal ship split apart, its screams echoing in frequencies not meant for human ears. Dying wail of arrogance collapsing. Panic bled through their communications. The words were no longer confident commands, but frantic questions, desperate calls to one another. Immortals were afraid. On the bridge of the Iron Rain, the crew finally smiled. Not in joy, but in the grim satisfaction of vengeance finally given form. Humanity had been underestimated, dismissed as vermin gnawing on the edges of empires, but vermin survive, vermin adapt, vermin bite when cornered. And as the warship drove forward, every gun screaming, Captain Harlow understood what had to be done. This was not a battle. This was an execution. The void between fleets was no longer silent. The Iron Rain had fired first, and that choice had changed the entire balance of the galaxy in less than 30 seconds. Once lesser species had bowed to the Eternals, believing their claim of immortality. Now one of their divine vessels burned in broken pieces across the dark, its light scattered like dying stars. The galaxy would never see them as untouchable again, but no one on the Iron Rain thought about history. The crew were locked into the rhythm of war. Fingers on triggers, eyes on glowing screens, every heartbeat aligned to the pulsing roar of their weapons. Captain Harlow stood as if carved from stone, refusing to sit, refusing to rest. His face was unreadable, but his jaw clenched each time another Eternal ship flickered across the tactical display. His warship was outnumbered 100 to 1. But to him, numbers had always been lies. Bring us closer, Harlow said, his first officer, a tall man with gray streaks at his temples, hesitated. Sir, if we close the distance, their lances will. They'll shred us either way. Closer. The Iron Rain obeyed, its engines howling. The ship groaned as metal pushed against its own limits, every rivet screaming with stress. They weren't meant to survive this maneuver. But survival wasn't the point. The point was to kill gods. The Eternals had not been idle. The destruction of 2 of their vessels had been enough to shake their arrogance. But fear gave way to anger. Their remaining ships moved in formation, surrounding the human warship like predators circling a wounded animal. Inside one of the Eternal flagships, a figure rose from his throne. His armor gleamed like ivory, flawless and smooth. His face unnaturally perfect, sculpted as if flesh were marble. He was called Vior, first of the Undying. His voice cut across every channel, amplified until even static bent before it. You dare, you fragile crawling insect, you dare. Do you not see what you defy? We are the beginning, we are the end. Your kind is dust beneath eternity's feet. On the Iron Rain, the crew listened to the voice booming across comms. It carried no humanity, no vulnerability, and yet, underneath the perfection, they all heard it. Rage, panic, the tiny crack in the mask of gods. Harlow didn't respond. He didn't believe in speeches. His ship's voice was its guns. Broadside, he ordered. The Iron Rain turned, its battered armor plates catching the pale light of the enemy fleet. Its cannons, relics of an older design, swung outward and locked into position. Dozens of heavy barrels, crude by comparison to Eternal elegance, but powerful in their brutality. Fire, the recoil shook the entire ship. Metal shuddered, pipes rattled. Bulkheads screamed, the crew braced against the shockwave, teeth rattling in their skulls, and then the rounds flew. Slugs the size of cars screamed into the void, each one spinning, each one a small apocalypse. They ripped through Eternal shields, tore into their holes, burst vessels apart from the inside. The white, pristine ships cracked like porcelain, smashed against stone. One Eternal cruiser exploded so violently that debris slammed against its neighbor, puncturing its flawless armor. For the first time in centuries, the Eternals bled each other. Valor staggered back as alarms blared across. His bridge, he had never heard alarms. Before, his people did not need them. They had always been perfect, eternal, untouchable, yet here they were. Shrieking warnings of fire. Decompression system failure, his hand trembled and rage surged through him. Like poison, this is nothing, he shouted. End them. End this vermin. Now his command unleashed a storm. From a dozen eternal vessels, lances of pure energy tore across the void. They were not bullets or missiles, they were sunlight forged into blades, slicing through space, vaporizing anything in their path. One beam caught the iron rain across its flank. The warship howled, metal screamed as plating vaporized. The shockwave hurled crewmen from their stations, alarms flooding the bridge. Fire roared through the corridors. Hungry and merciless, whole compartments were sealed off, their crews sacrificed. In an instant as the ship's AI locked bulkheads to prevent total destruction. Harlow did not flinch, his knuckles whitened as the ship groaned around him. But his eyes never left the tactical display. Status, he barked, shields gone. We're down to armor, hull breach on decks 5 through 7, casualties. The officer hesitated, dozens. Harlow nodded once, his eyes hardened. Then we're still fighting. The iron rain plunged forward, ignoring the holes burned into its side. Its guns roared again, every cannon spitting metal death into the enemy lines. Inside the gunnery decks, men and women worked like demons, sweat pouring down their faces, hands blistered from the heat of reloading. They were not engineers, they were not immortals, they were survivors, dragging shells the size of coffins into place, screaming to one another over the thunder of weapons. Load it, load it, load it, gun 3. Ready, fire, God damn it, fire. The warship shook as another broadside tore free and another eternal ship cracked apart, spilling bodies into the void. They didn't look like gods anymore. They looked like corpses, pale and broken, drifting among the wreckage. But the Eternals were not beaten. 3 of their cruisers moved in unison, flanking the iron rain, their lances cut again, stabbing into the human vessels. Engines, explosions ripped across the ship's spine, throwing sparks and bodies into zero-gravity chaos. On the engineering deck, Chief Reynolds, a man whose face was half scar from an earlier war, fought through smoke and flame. His voice was raw as he screamed into comms, engine 2 is gone. 3's holding by duct tape and prayer. We're losing thrust. Harlow's voice came calm, cold. Keep us moving, Chief. We die standing. Reynolds laughed bitterly, even as fire scorched his arms. You stubborn bastard. Aye, Captain. He and his crew plunged their hands into the guts of the ship, pulling cables, welding under fire, ignoring the burns as alarms screamed. Overhead, the iron rain bled, but it still moved. On the bridge, Harlow watched the tactical map shrink. The Eternals were closing in. They would surround the human vessel and cut it apart piece by piece. His crew knew it. The silence carried the weight of grim acceptance. Then Harlow gave an order that silenced even the alarms, rammed the flagship. Every head turned. His first officer's face went pale. Sir, do it. The iron rains. Engines roared, the battered ship turning toward the gleaming Eternal flagship where Vior raged. The warship did not care about survival anymore. It cared about ending the lie of gods. The crew did not hesitate. They strapped themselves in, braced for the storm. If they were going to die, they would die. Like men, not slaves. Vaylor's eyes widened as the human ship charged. No, he hissed, no. The Eternal Fleet scrambled, firing. Lances in panic, beams tore into the iron rain, ripping armor, burning decks, turning men into ash. The ship should have died 100 times, but it didn't. It kept coming. Every lance that struck only burned away weakness, leaving behind a core of fury and steel. Every casualty was fuel for vengeance. The closer they came, the louder the crew screamed, the harder the guns thundered. And then the iron rain struck. Collision tore the void apart. The human warship smashed into the Eternal flagship with the weight of a world's hatred. Metal tore against metal, hulls crumpling like paper, explosions chaining across both vessels. The bridge of the Eternal ship shattered in fire. Vor's perfect body thrown across his throne as alarm screamed. Harlow stood, unflinching as the world shook, his voice low, steady, carrying across his burning bridge. God's fall. The iron rain's prow ripped straight into the heart of the flagship, embedding itself like a blade driven into flesh. Fires spread through both ships, oxygen feeding an inferno none should exist. The void itself seemed to burn. Silence followed, not the silence of peace, but the silence of shock. The Eternal Fleet froze, their flawless formation broken, their voices silent across comms. For the first time, their immortality had failed them. For the first time, they had seen a god bleed and die. On the iron rain, survivors coughed through smoke, dragging themselves from wreckage, refusing to fall, even as their ship burned around them. Harlow stood at the front of the bridge, eyes fixed on the ruined flagship, still locked against his vessel. He knew this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning, because once you prove gods can die, you can never put the fear back into people again. And humanity had just drawn first blood. The wreckage burned where no fire should exist. The collision between the iron rain and Vor's flagship had fused the two vessels into a twisted carcass of metal. Oxygen vented from ruptured decks, fed pockets of flame that clung stubbornly to steel. The void beyond glittered with debris, shards of armor, shattered hulls, and the frozen bodies of those who once thought themselves eternal. Inside the mangled remains, silence was a lie. It was broken by groans of twisting metal, alarms shrieking endlessly, the hissing roar of venting gas, and the voices of survivors struggling to make sense of the aftermath. On the iron rain's bridge, Captain Harlow wiped soot from his brow. With a bloodied hand, the ship was dying around him, but its heart still beat. He could feel it in the deck beneath his boots, a steady thrum of power, fragile yet defiant. Status, he demanded, his voice like gravel. His first officer staggered back to his station, clutching a broken arm against his chest. Bridge crew down to a third. Communications are fried. Weapons, he glanced at the dead consoles. We're out. All we've got left are small arms and teeth. Harlow gave a sharp nod. Then that's what we'll use. The Eternal flagship had not died. Quietly, alarms screamed in a language that was half music, half command. Their tones alien, yet strangely panicked. Their ship was built to inspire awe. Smooth white corridors, high ceilings, air scented with sterile perfection. But now those corridors were cracked, flooded with smoke, blackened with fire. The Eternals inside were not gods anymore. They were men and women, stripped of their masks, bleeding, coughing, scrambling to salvage pride. Their armor gleamed even through the soot, but it was dented, cracked, and stained with their own blood. One of them, a commander with eyes too perfect and skin unmarred until now, barked orders in fury: seal off the breach, board the vermin ship, drag their captain here alive. I will carve his defiance from his bones. The vermin ship was already fused into their hull. The collision had created open passages between the two vessels, jagged wounds where steel met steel. Smoke and sparks drifted across the seams. The survivors on both sides could already hear one another moving in the darkness. War was coming, not between fleets now, but between men in the iron Rain's barracks. What remained of the ship's marines prepared themselves. Their commander, Sergeant Doran, was a brute of a man, shoulders thick as a bulkhead, his face carved from scars and bitterness. He had lost his family in the first eternal raid against a colony. He lived for this fight. He slammed a fist against the wall to draw his men's attention. Listen up, we're out of heavy guns, we're out of support, and we're outnumbered by bastards who think they're gods. But I'll tell you something, they bleed the same as us. You saw it. The Marines, bruised and bleeding, nodded grimly. Their weapons were battered rifles, shotguns scarred with years of use, knives sharpened so often the steel was thin. They were not elegant, but they were lethal in the hands of desperate men. Doran grinned, a wolf's smile. We've got one advantage. These immortals don't know how to fight like men. They've never had to. They expect us to kneel, so when they come, we'll show them how humans kneel, by shoving steel through their ribs. The Marines roared approval, a savage, broken sound. The first clash came. The wreckage of a corridor, Eternals in gleaming armor surged through the twisted breach, blades of white energy humming in their hands. Their movements were graceful, almost theatrical, as if they still believed they were on some stage of worship. The humans met them with brutality. Shotguns thundered at close range, tearing into flawless armor and spraying the corridor with blood. Knives flashed in desperate hands. A Marine tackled an Eternal to the ground, stabbing again and again, screaming curses as blood poured hot and thick across his hands. The Eternals fought back with rage and disbelief. Their blades cut men in half. Their strength tore through bodies like paper, but the humans didn't break, even when limbs were severed, even when lungs filled with blood. They clung to their enemies and dragged them down. The corridor became a slaughterhouse. Screams echoed off steel. Smoke stung the eyes. Blood licked the floor. The Eternals had expected fear. What they found was fury. On the Eternal flagship's bridge, Vior clawed his way upright. His body was cracked, golden ire leaking from wounds that should have been impossible. His perfection was broken. He stared at the cracks in his hand as if the universe had betrayed him. This cannot be, he whispered. But it was. His guards stood silent, their eyes wide with something he had never seen before. Fear. Vior's rage boiled. No, I'm undying. I am eternal. Send them all. I will drown this vermin ship in blood. His guards obeyed, but their hands shook as they gripped their blades. The god they worshipped was bleeding. That sight could not be unseen. Harlow moved with his Marines. He refused to sit in safety. His pistol was old but heavy, the kind of weapon that broke bones when swung like a club. His crew looked to him not for orders now, but for strength. The fighting spread deeper into the Wreckage, corridor by corridor, room by room, humans and Eternals tore each other apart. Firelight flickered across blood-streaked walls, shadows danced as blades and bullets cut through bodies. At one breach, Harlow fired his pistol into an Eternal's face, the shot tearing away perfection in an explosion of gore. At another, he dragged a wounded crewman to safety, shouting orders to cover the retreat. He felt every death like a weight in his chest. But he did not falter, he couldn't. Sergeant Doran's squad pushed into an eternal chamber, walls curved and gleaming with alien artistry. Statues of Eternals stood in a love's, eyes cold and judging. Doran spat at their feet. Pretty, ain't it? He growled. Let's ruin it. The Eternals attacked in waves. Their blades hummed, their movements precise, but the Marines fought like animals. One man slammed an Eternal into a statue and blew his head apart with a shotgun blast. Another lit himself on fire with a jury-rigged fuel canister and tackled three of them, screaming as the chamber erupted in flames. The battle was madness, chaos. Blood painted the white walls until they looked like butcher's slabs, and still the Marines held. Chief Reynolds fought in engineering, wielding a wrench bigger than his arm. He had no rifle left, no grenades, but when an Eternal soldier stormed through the flames, Reynolds swung the wrench with every ounce of hatred he had left. The crack echoed through the chamber as the Eternal's skull caved in. Reynolds spat blood and grease. Immortal, my ass, he laughed even as another blade carved through his side. His crew dragged him back, firing wildly, refusing to let him fall alone. By the third hour of fighting, the wreckage was a graveyard. Whole sections were unrecognizable, blackened with soot and choked with corpses. Humans lay side by side with Eternals, their blood mingling, their perfection ruined, their mortality exposed. The fighting slowed, not because either side had given up, but because exhaustion and death had whittled them to nothing. On the Iron Rain, only a fraction of the crew remained, but they still stood. Their eyes burned with something more dangerous than hope. Resolve. Harlow found himself face to face with Vior at last. It was in the shattered remains of the Eternal Bridge, where fires burned beneath a broken ceiling, stars glaring through ruptures in the hull. Vior stood tall despite his wounds, his armor cracked but still gleaming faintly. His blade hummed, a line of white light trembling with fury. Harlow lifted his pistol. His hand was steady. You're no god, Harlow said, voice flat, just a man who forgot how to die. Vor's scream shook the chamber. He lunged, blade slashing. Harlow dove aside, the weapon carving sparks through steel. He fired shots punching into Vior's chest, ichor spraying, but Vor did not fall. He kept coming, fueled by rage and denial. The two collided in violence. Vor's blade cut across Harlow's arm, burning flesh. Harlow smashed the butt of his pistol into the Eternal's face, cracking bone. They fought like beasts, no elegance, only survival. At last Harlow drove his knife into Vaylor's throat. He twisted, ripping the blade free in a gush of golden ior. Vior staggered, eyes wide, hand clutching at the wound. His voice rasped, broken. I'm Eternal. Harlow shoved him backward. Not anymore. Vaylor collapsed among the ruins of his throne, golden ichor pooling beneath him. His eyes dimmed, his perfection fading to the truth of mortality. The god was dead. The surviving Eternals Fled, some fought on, desperate and wild, but most turned in panic. They had seen their leader fall, seen their immortality broken. The myth was gone, shattered beyond repair. The Iron Rain stood victorious, but ruined. Half the ship was gone, most of the crew lay dead, fires still raged. Systems barely clung to life, but they had done the impossible. They had killed gods. Harlow stood on the ruined bridge, looking out at the wreckage drifting through space. His body ached, his arm burned, his lungs were raw from smoke. But his eyes were hard, unyielding. He knew what this meant. The galaxy had watched the Eternals for centuries, trembling under their rule. Now word would spread, whispers would become fire. If gods could die, then no one had to kneel anymore. Humanity had lit the spark, and the galaxy would burn with it. The stars had never looked so cold. From the fractured bridge of the Iron Rain, Captain Harlow stood among twisted steel and broken glass, staring out at the void. Pieces of the Eternal flagship drifted past like the bones of some ancient beast, glowing faintly as fire died in the vacuum. The silence after battle was always worse than the fight itself. During battle, the noise kept men alive. Gunfire, screams, orders barked over chaos. Silence left only the weight of what was lost. The Iron Rain was crippled, half its hull was gone. Engines sputtering, life support failing in sections, one after another. Survivors, less than a quarter of the original crew, were scattered through wreckage, working like madmen to keep the ship from turning into a coffin. And the Eternals were not gone. Their fleet, shaken and broken, still lingered at the edge of sensor range. They were regrouping, arguing among themselves, perhaps even afraid. But Harlow knew fear could become fury, and when it did, his ship would not survive a second storm. "Sir," his first officer staggered up beside him, arms still bound in a makeshift sling. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow from smoke and sleepless hours. "We can't hold. Power cells are draining faster than we can ration. The hull breach on deck 12, it's spreading." Harlow's jaw tightened. "How long?" "Hours. Maybe less if they come back." The captain's gaze remained fixed on the wreckage drifting beyond the shattered viewport. Out there lay the corpse of Vior, the god who bled, the symbol of everything they had fought for. The galaxy would change because of this moment, but symbols wouldn't keep his crew alive. "We're not done yet," Harlow said. "Not while I'm breathing." Down in the bowels of the ship, Sergeant Doran dragged his squad through smoke-filled corridors. He was coughing blood, one arm bound in tape, but his voice carried like thunder. "Move, you bastards. The ship's bleeding out, but we're not letting it die alone." His Marines looked like ghosts, faces streaked with soot and ash, eyes hollow but burning with savage defiance. They had lost brothers in the corridors, buried friends under collapsed bulkheads. They carried more knives than bullets now, but they still moved like wolves, hungry, dangerous, unwilling to stop. They passed compartments where bodies floated weightless in the thin air, eyes frozen open. Some wore human uniforms, others wore eternal armor, cracked and blackened. Doran didn't look twice. They were all the same, now dead. At engineering, Chief Reynolds was a demon in grease and blood, refusing to collapse even as his side bled through torn fabric. He screamed at his team with a voice that cut through the roar of machinery. "Keep the reactor stable, or we all blow. I don't care if you've got one hand left, use it." A young Technician looked up from a console. Eyes wide, "Sir, the core is cracked. It won't hold." Reynolds slammed a fist onto the console, sparks flying. "Then you hold it. We're not dying in the dark while those bastards laugh. Not while I'm still standing." His crew obeyed, dragging tools into fire, welding with bare hands, coughing through smoke. They were beyond exhaustion, beyond reason. They were pure willpower made flesh, but the war wasn't over. Across the fused wreckage, the remaining Eternal soldiers regrouped. They were fewer now, stripped of arrogance, armor cracked and smeared with blood. But their fury had not dimmed. One of their commanders, her perfect features scarred and burned, snarled at her. "Warriors, they killed Valor. They think us mortal. We will carve that lie from their throats, burn their ship, leave none alive." The Eternals readied their weapons. Their footsteps echoed through broken halls as they marched toward the seams where their ship and the Iron Rain had fused. The war would continue, not between fleets, but in the shadows of burning steel. Harlow knew it too. He stood at the center of the ruined bridge, pistol holstered, knife in his hand. His officers gathered around what few remained alive. "They'll come again," Harlow said. "Desperate, angry, they need to kill us to make themselves believe they're still gods." One of the younger crewmen, his face pale and streaked with blood, whispered, "We can't stop them, sir. We're too few." Harlow's eyes burned. "Numbers don't decide wars, men do. We killed their leader with a ship held together by rust, and hate will kill the rest the same way." The bridge fell silent, but the silence carried weight. The men straightened, their eyes hardened. Harlow's voice dropped to a growl. "They wanted us on our knees. Tonight they'll find out humanity doesn't kneel." The second boarding clash came at the wrecked midsection where the two ships' guts were welded together by fire. The Eternals surged forward, blades glowing, voices raised in fury. The humans waited. In the dark, Doran's Marines set up barricades from twisted steel, rifles trained on the breach. The air was thick with smoke, every breath burning. "Wait for it," Doran muttered, shotgun steady. His men crouched low, nerves strung tight. The Eternals appeared, glowing weapons cutting through the haze. Like beacons, they marched proud, even. Now blades raised high. Now Doran roared. The corridor exploded with gunfire. Shotguns thundered, rifles cracked, grenades bounced and erupted in bursts of fire. Eternal armor shattered, bodies thrown back into the dark. Screams cut through the chaos as gods bled once again, but the Eternals didn't break. They surged forward, cutting through barricades, blades carving men apart. The humans met them hand to hand, knives flashing, fists pounding against armor. It was slaughter, brutal and close. Doran himself leapt onto an Eternal, ripping off the soldier's helmet and slamming his knife into perfect flesh again and again. Blood sprayed hot across his face. He screamed like a beast. Laughter and rage tangled together when the last Eternal fell. Doran stood drenched in blood, chest heaving. Half his squad lay dead around him, but the corridor was theirs. "Immortal," he spat. "Nothing bleeds like immortal." Hours dragged like centuries. The Iron Rain groaned with every passing moment, her hull splitting further, fires spreading. The surviving crew worked like madmen, dragging bodies out, sealing breaches with whatever they could find. But the truth was clear. The ship could not last. On the bridge, Harlow leaned over the flickering tactical display. The Eternal Fleet still lingered, scattered and broken, but watching, waiting, if they realized how close to death the Iron Rain was, they would swarm and finish it. A voice crackled over damaged comms. Captain, external signals, multiple. Sources not eternal. Harlow frowned. Show me. The display flickered, then lit up with new contacts, dozens of ships. Scattered, ragged, some barely functional. Their signals were weak, but familiar, not human, not eternal. They were other species, the ones who had knelt for centuries, the ones who had worshipped in fear. Now they came, drawn by the sight of burning gods. On one of those ships, a reptilian captain stared at the wreckage of Vior's flagship. His scales rippled with awe and terror. They bled, he whispered. The Eternals bled, his crew hissed. Agreement, voices filled with something dangerous, hope. On another vessel, insected soldiers chittered in unison. The lie is broken. The lie is broken. Across the galaxy, signals spread, word carried on channels the Eternals could not block. A single truth raced faster than light. The gods can die, but truth could not save the Iron Rain. Chief Reynolds collapsed at his console, coughing blood, his crew dragging him back to lean against a wall. His voice was weak but steady. Reactors gone. Captain, she won't last another hour. Harlow closed his eyes for a moment, then looked to the surviving crew. Then we make it count. He straightened, voice hard. Prepare evacuation pods. Load the wounded first. We'll scatter. Get as many out as we can. The first officer hesitated. And you, sir? Harlow's eyes went back to the wreckage of Vior's ship. His hand tightened on his pistol. I'll be the last, always the last. The crew obeyed, even through tears. Pods hissed open, men carrying their wounded brothers into cramped metal coffins. Doring cursed, but let himself be shoved into one, blood pouring from his wounds. Reynolds refused until two Marines forced him down, still muttering about engines. The pods fired one by one, streaking into the void like falling stars. The Eternal Fleet shifted at their launch, but none moved to intercept. Perhaps fear held them back, perhaps disbelief. Harlow watched them go until only one pod remained. The ship groaned louder now, bulkheads splitting, fires roaring. The Iron Rain was dying, but she had died as no ship ever had before. The comm crackled one last time, a voice faint, desperate, from one of the alien ships. Human captain, you lit the fire. We will not kneel again. Harlow allowed himself a faint smile. Then he turned, limped toward the final pod, and sealed himself inside. The Iron Rain burned behind him, sinking into silence as the last of her crew scattered into the galaxy, and far beyond, the lie of eternity crumbled. The pod shook like it was trying to shake him loose. Captain Harlow sat strapped in the cramped coffin of steel, the walls groaning with every impact as debris battered against the hull. Red lights flickered overhead, a constant reminder that this fragile shell was all that stood between him and the endless void. He'd faced war, fire, and gods, but there was something worse. In silence, something colder about waiting to die in a metal box. The pod systems hummed faintly, oxygen readouts blinked in the yellow. Power was limited. He knew the numbers. 2 days, maybe 3, before air ran out. Less if the filters failed, and the pod had no weapons, no defenses. If the Eternal Fleet decided to sweep up the debris, he would be little more than easy prey. Still, he wasn't afraid. Fear had burned out of him long ago. What he felt now was something heavier. Guilt. Every face of the crew burned. Into his memory, the Marines butchered. In corridors, Reynolds coughing blood. And engineering, Doran snarling through. His last breaths, they'd bought this moment with their lives. He was the one. Left to carry it, he looked out the narrow viewport. The wreckage of the Iron Rain drifted silently, her once proud frame now a twisted husk. Fires still flickering faintly along her spine. She looked less like a warship now and more like a tomb. Rest, Harlow muttered under his breath. You earned it, the comm crackled. Faintly static hissing. Then a voice broke through, weak, strained but alive. Captain, this is Pod 3, do you read? Harlow leaned forward, gripping the receiver. I read, identify, it's Anders. Sir, pilot from Deck 7, got 3 others. With me, wounded but breathing. Harlow exhaled, tension loosening in his chest. Survivors. Good. Stay quiet, keep your beacon low. We don't want the bastards picking us up. Another voice cut in, harsh and ragged. This is Pod 6, Doran here. Still bleeding but not dead. Got 2 kids with me, they look worse. Harlow almost smiled. Doran's voice was a thunderstorm even through static. Hold fast, Sergeant, you'll live just. Despite them, static filled the comms. For a moment, then a third voice, soft and shaking. Pod 9, Chief Reynolds, thought you ditched me, Captain. Harlow's throat tightened. Reynolds had been half dead when they'd shoved him into the pod. I wouldn't dare, Chief, glad to hear your voice. Reynolds coughed, the sound wet and painful. Won't be glad for long. Reactor fried my lungs, not sure I'll last. Don't talk like that, Harlow snapped. We didn't crawl out of hell just for you to quit now. The silence that followed was heavy, but Reynolds finally gave a weak chuckle. Still bossy, even when you've got nothing left. Fine, I'll hold. For the first time since the Iron Rain had died, Harlow allowed himself to believe. They weren't gone yet, but the pods weren't safe. On the edge of the debris field, eternal vessels lingered, not the massive flagships that had shattered fleets, but smaller hunter ships, sleek, white, and patient. They prowled like wolves around a carcass, scanning, searching. The survivors saw them through narrow viewports, their pale light sweeping across the wreckage. One wrong signal, one loud transmission, and the pods would be found. Doran's voice crackled over comms, low and bitter. They're sniffing for us like vultures. Harlow's mind raced. He knew eternal tactics. They would sweep, gather survivors as trophies, execute them publicly to rebuild their shattered myth. They couldn't allow that. Silent running, Harlow ordered, no signals. Unless I give the word, we drift and we wait. Someone out there saw what we did. Someone will come. The crew obeyed, but silence was its own torture. Hours turned into a day. Oxygen dipped lower. The air grew stale, burning the throat with every breath. Sweat slicked the walls, condensation dripping like tears. Hunger gnawed thirst worse. In Pod 6, Doran tore strips from his uniform to bind wounds. In Pod 3, Anders whispered prayers to gods Harlow no longer believed in. In Pod 9, Reynolds' voice grew weaker. Captain, you think it mattered what we did? Harlow clenched his fists. We killed their leader. We showed the galaxy the truth. It mattered. Reynolds coughed blood, his words slurred. I just wanted to see home again. One more sunrise over Earth. Harlow closed his eyes. You'll see it, I promise. But promises were fragile in the void. On the second day, the Eternal Hunters closed in. Harlow saw them through the viewport. 3 ships, white holes, gleaming weapons hot. They swept the wreckage with brutal precision. A pod, too close to the ruins of the flagship, was caught in their light. Pod 4. The survivors inside didn't even have time to scream before a lance of energy tore the pod apart. The comms went wild. Screams, curses, prayers. Doran roared with fury. Anders begged for orders. Harlow's voice cut through like a blade. Silence, stay dark, stay hidden. The hunters circled again, scanning, searching. They were predators, patient and merciless. Harlow gripped his knife, useless against ships but steady in his hand. If they found him, he'd go down fighting. But salvation came from the dark. A new signal pierced the silence, faint at first, then stronger. Ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, their engines flaring blue and green. Not eternal, not human, alien. Dozens of vessels, ragged and mismatched, painted in the colors of rebellion. They weren't powerful fleets, just scavengers. Freyers, retrofitted warships stolen from their masters, but they came armed, angry and unafraid. The comms lit up with voices in a dozen languages, all saying the same thing in different words. We saw the gods fall, now they bleed, now we rise. The Eternal Hunters turned, startled. Their arrogance cracked again. For the first time they faced prey that did not scatter. Rebel fleet opened fire. The battle was chaos. The Eternal Hunters fought with elegance, their lances cutting swaths through weaker ships, but the rebels swarmed them in numbers, firing missiles, boarding with desperate fury. Harlow watched through his viewport as one rebel ship, freighter barely held together, rammed an Eternal Hunter head-on, exploding in fire and dragging the enemy with it. Another hunter was swarmed by smaller craft, missiles pounding until its flawless hull shattered. The last tried to flee. It didn't make it. The rebels tore it apart with rage. Silence followed, but not the silence of despair. This was the silence of victory. The comm crackled. A voice, guttural and harsh, filled the pods. Human captain, we saw you strike the undying. We saw their god die. Your war is ours now. We'll pull you from the void. Hold fast. For the first time since the Iron Rain had fallen, Harlow allowed himself to breathe deeply. Rebellion had begun. Hours later, the pods were pulled into docking bays of ragged alien ships. Harlow stepped out into stale, recycled air, greeted by eyes that burned with respect. Reptilian warriors bowed their heads. Insectoid crews chittered in unison. Even species humans had never seen before watched him with awe. He was no longer just a captain, he was a symbol. Behind him, Doran limped out of his pod, blood-soaked and grinning. Reynolds was carried half-conscious, still cursing about engines. Anders stumbled, wittied. Survivors all but scarred forever. The alien commander approached a towering creature with tusks like knives. His voice rumbled like stone. You showed us the truth. The gods are mortal. Now the galaxy will burn with it. Harlow met his gaze, unflinching. Then let's burn it together. That night, or what passed for night in the void, Harlow stood alone at a viewport, watching the stars. The rebellion had begun, but war was far from over. The Eternals would strike back. They would come with fury, desperate to rebuild their myth, but the galaxy had seen them bleed. That truth was stronger than any weapon. Harlow clenched his fists. He thought of the Iron Rain, of the men who died too. Strike the first blow, he thought of Earth, of colonies waiting for vengeance. He thought of Valor bleeding. Out on his throne, he whispered into the dark, God's fallen will be there too. Make sure they stay down. The rebel ship that carried Harlow was old, its hull patched with metal scavenged from wrecked freighters, its engines whining like animals under a heavy load. The corridors were cramped, the air thick with the stench of oil and too many bodies, but it was alive. For men who had crawled from the wreck of the Iron Rain, that was enough. Harlow moved through the ship in silence, his boots clanging against grates, eyes watching the aliens around him. They gave him space, not out of fear, but reverence. They had seen the images passed from ship to ship like fire in dry grass. Human warship ramming an eternal flagship, a god's body lying broken. The story had already outrun him. Doran limped at his side, one arm bound in bloody bandages, grinning through pain. They're looking at you like you're some kind of prophet, he muttered. Harlow grunted, I'm no prophet, just a man who refused to kneel. Doesn't matter what you think, they've already decided what you are. Question is, what do you do with it? That question weighed heavier than any weapon. The makeshift command chamber was crowded when Harlow entered. Representatives from half a dozen species stood around a crude table, its surface covered with a flickering holographic projection of the sector. Red icons marked eternal garrisons, stations and patrol routes scattered. Green lights showed uprisings, flickers of rebellion where slaves had risen after hearing the Eternals could die. The alien commander who had first spoken to Harlow stood at the head of the table. He was massive, tusked, his hide scarred with battles. His name was Gorlak, and his voice carried like a drum. We have seen the gods fall. The spark has lit. Colonies whisper of rebellion. Slaves take up arms, but sparks die without flame. We need more than scattered uprisings. We need war. Murmurs filled the room. Some agreed. Voices full of anger. Others hesitated, fear still gripping their bones. They will strike back, hissed a thin insectoid leader. Their fleet still darken the stars. Their soldiers still hold our worlds. We have no weapons to face them. Doran spat on the floor. You've got more than you think. You've got numbers, you've got fury, and now you've got proof they bleed. That's more dangerous than any weapon. Eyes turned to Harlow. He hadn't spoken yet, but his silence had weight. He stepped forward, his voice low but carrying. I fought them. I saw their leader bleed. Out on his throne, they're strong, yes, but strength makes them arrogant. They've never faced enemies who fight with nothing left to lose. That's what we are now. The room stilled, every pair of eyes locked on him. We can't match them ship for ship, Harlow continued. Not yet, but we don't have to. We hit where it hurts. Garrison world supply lines. Show every slave they're not alone. Show every eternal they're not untouchable. Turn their empire into fire, one piece at a time. The silence broke into murmurs, agreement, excitement, even laughter. The rebellion was no longer a whisper. It was becoming a plan. The days that followed were chaos disguised as purpose. Harlow and Doran worked with alien captains to forge fleets from scraps. Old freighters were stripped and retrofitted with weapons stolen from eternal patrols. Mining ships were armored with plating welded from junkyards. Small craft were loaded with Explosives meant to ram and burn if nothing else. The rebels had no discipline, no unity, but they had rage. And rage could be shaped into something deadly. Chief Reynolds, too weak to walk still, barked orders from a medbay cot. He guided alien engineers through jury-rigged power systems, teaching them human tricks for coaxing life from failing reactors. His voice was raw, but his eyes glowed with purpose. Doesn't matter what language you speak, he rasped to a witty alien mechanic. Engines are engines. You push them, they scream. You push harder, they explode. Keep them just shy of screaming. That's how you fly. The alien nodded, scribbling notes with shaking claws, but organizing fury was no easy task. Fights broke out between species in the hangars, old grudges flaring. Some wanted revenge on the Eternals immediately, others wanted to wait to gather more ships. Fear still clung like a parasite. One night Doran found Harlow standing alone at a viewport, watching sparks fly from repair crews below. You're carrying them on your back, Doran said. Harlow didn't look away. If I stumble, they all fall. You're not a god either, Captain. You can't carry everything alone. Harlow finally turned, his eyes hard. Then I'll die trying. Better that than let the bastards win. Doran shook his head, half a smile tugging at his lips. Stubborn son of an NBSP, an NBSP. The first test came sooner than expected. Scouts reported an Eternal supply convoy moving through the sector. 2 cargo ships carrying weapons and fuel, guarded by a single patrol cruiser. It was bait, some argued. Too easy. The Eternals wanted rebels to attack so they could crush them. Harlow disagreed. Even bait has teeth, and if we're too afraid to bite, then we've already lost. The council hesitated, but Gorlak slammed his tusked jaw against the table. The human is right. Blood calls. For blood we strike. The decision was made. The rebel fleet moved with nerves stretched thin. Their ships rattled and groaned, barely spaceworthy. Crews whispered prayers, some to gods, some to nothing at all. Harlow stood aboard one of the larger vessels, a converted freighter now, bristling with missile pods welded from scrap. He didn't command the fleet officially, but eyes turned to him all the same. The convoy appeared as promised. 2 massive cargo ships, white hulls gleaming, and their escort, a sleek Eternal cruiser. Harlow's voice carried through the comms. This is where we prove it wasn't luck. This is where we show them we're not prey anymore. Strike hard, strike fast, and don't stop until they burn. The battle began. The Eternal cruiser moved with elegance, its lances cutting through the void. The first rebel ship exploded in fire, debris scattering. Panic rippled, but Harlow's voice cut through. Keep moving, swarm them. The rebels obeyed. Dozens of smaller craft surged forward, missiles and rockets streaking through space. Explosions rocked the cargo ships, their shields flaring then failing. One rebel vessel rammed a cargo ship head-on, detonating in fire that tore through its hull. Another latched onto the second cargo vessel, boarding parties flooding inside. With knives and rifles, the Eternal cruiser fought with fury, slicing through rebels, but it was outnumbered. Ships clung to it like parasites, hammering with explosives. One by one, its lances flickered and died. At last the cruiser cracked, fire spilling from its perfect hull. It exploded, fragments scattering like shattered glass. The rebels roared in triumph. The convoy was destroyed, its cargo seized. For the first time in centuries, an eternal supply line had been broken. The galaxy would hear of it. In the aftermath, the rebels gathered in the hangars cheering, singing in a dozen languages. Some wept, openly clutching one another. Harlow stood among them silent. He felt no triumph, only resolve. Doran clapped him on the back. You did it, Captain. You gave them something to believe in. Harlow's eyes narrowed. Belief isn't enough. The Eternals will come harder next time, and when they do, we'll need more than belief. We'll need an army. That night, Harlow met with Gorlak in the command chamber. The tusked alien's eyes glowed with fire. You have given us victory, Gorlak rumbled. You have given us war. From this day, humanity is not alone. We will fight at your side. Harlow nodded. Slowly, then we start building ships. Weapons, soldiers, we make this rebellion more than sparks. We make it fire they can't put out. His voice dropped heavy with promise. And when their empire burns, we'll be there too. Watch the gods choke on their own ashes. The galaxy trembled when the Eternals struck back. The rebellion's victory over the convoy spread like wildfire. Whispers turned into shouts. Colonies long beaten into silence raised banners of defiance. On slave worlds, workers stole weapons, overran garrisons, and tore down statues of perfect faces. The Eternals, for the first time in memory, were mocked openly, but gods did not accept mockery. From the core of their empire came fleets unlike anything the rebels had faced, hundreds of ships flawless, white engines roaring like storms. They descended on rebel-held worlds with fire and fury. The first planet to fall was Arlos, a mining colony that had dared raise its head. Its surface burned within hours. Cities turned to ash, millions slaughtered. The survivors were broadcast across the galaxy, their executions shown in grotesque detail. On another world, Tzile, the Eternals chained the corpses of rebel leaders to orbiting satellites, their bodies displayed as warnings visible from the ground. The message was clear: defy us, and we will erase you. On the rebel flagship Blood Fang, Harlow stood before a gathering of captains and commanders. The room was thick with tension, the air stinking of fear. Holograms of burning worlds flickered on the table before them. They're breaking us, hissed an insected leader, his mandibles clicking. Every uprising we spark, they crush harder. Our people die in the millions. A reptilian captain slammed his claws against the table. Better to die fighting than live kneeling. Enough, Harlow growled, his voice cut through the chaos. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. The Eternals are trying to scare us back into silence. They want us to believe we made a mistake when we stood. But fear is a weapon. They use it because they've got nothing else, and weapons can be broken. Gorlak rumbled, his tusked jaw tight. Then how do we fight back? They outnumber us, outgun us, outmatch us in every way. Harlow's answer was blunt. We don't fight them head on, not yet. They burn worlds to prove a point. We make them bleed where they think they're safe. We hit their stations, their shipyards, their temples. We make them spend blood to hold every inch of ground. The room fell into silence. Commanders looked to one another, their fear colliding with rage. At last Doran spat on the floor. The captain's right. They think they're breaking us. All they're doing is showing every world what they really are, butchers hiding behind lies. If we keep hitting more, we'll rise. And the more who rise, the harder it'll be for the bastards to hold it together. One by one, heads nodded. Fear didn't vanish, but it hardened into resolve. The next months were fire and shadow. The rebels became ghost fleets, scattered, striking in small groups, never staying long enough to be crushed. They hit fuel depots, slave caravans, eternal patrols. They sabotaged communication relays, turned propaganda broadcasts into images of Vior bleeding out on his throne. Every strike carried Harlow's mark, calculated, brutal, leaving no question that the gods could be touched. But the retaliation never stopped. For every convoy destroyed, a world burned. For every eternal ship brought down, 1,000 innocents were executed. The galaxy became a battlefield of symbols, each side trying to prove the other was weak. The cost was unbearable. One night in the blood Fang's strategy chamber, Harlow stood alone, staring at the tactical map. Red markers outnumbered green 10-1. Each red was an eternal stronghold. Each green was a rebellion spark. Doran limped in, his face darker than usual. Reports just came in. The colony on Reunir, it's gone. Harlow's jaw tightened. Casualties everyone. They burned the atmosphere. Captain, whole planet's a cinder now. The words were knives. Harlow closed his eyes, but the image seared itself into him anyway. Millions turned to ash because they dared to believe. Doran slammed his fist against the wall. We can't keep watching this. We're bleeding them, sure, but they're killing faster than we can save. Harlow turned, his eyes hollow but burning. You think I don't know that? Every world they burn feels like I'm standing there watching. But if we go at them head on, we'll die and the galaxy will kneel. Again, we keep hitting, keep dragging them down piece by piece until even their own start to doubt. Doran's shoulders sagged, his anger turning to grim resignation. How long can we keep it up? As long as it takes, Harlow said, his voice carried no hope, only iron. The rebellion's most daring strike came on the eternal world of Salera, a core planet untouched for centuries, where the Eternals built ships and trained their so-called undying. Harlow led the assault personally. The rebel fleet emerged from the void like knives, catching the defenders off guard. Missiles screamed through the sky, shattering shipyards. Boarding parties stormed temples, dragging eternal priests from their altars and executing them in front of their own worshippers. Harlow himself fought in the streets, pistol in one hand, knife in the other. His Marines tore down banners, burned statues, and broadcast every moment across the stars. For the first time, an eternal world burned. The victory was short-lived. The rebels couldn't hold the planet. Within days, eternal reinforcements descended, retaking it in fire and blood. But the damage was done. The galaxy had seen a god world fall. The lie was crumbling. Further, on the Blood Fang afterward, the survivors gathered. Gorlak stood, tall, tusks gleaming with blood. We showed them their own world is not safe. They will choke on their fear, but the cost was steep. Half the fleet was gone. Thousands dead. In the medbay, Reynolds coughed blood into his hand, his lungs failing. He grabbed Harlow's arm, his grip weak but fierce. Don't let it be for nothing, Reynolds rasped. Every man who died out there, every woman who burned, we bought you this chance. Don't you waste it. Harlow squeezed his hand, his voice low. I won't, I swear it. Reynolds' eyes closed, his breath slowing. The chief who had kept engines alive Through hell was gone, Harlow stood over him for a long time, the weight of his promise pressing like chains. The Eternal's propaganda grew louder there, voices booming across captured channels. The vermin scatter, their fleets burn. Their captains crawl into the dark. We are eternal. We will not fall. But the more they shouted, the less the galaxy believed. Too many had seen Vior's corpse, too many had seen eternal. Ships shattered, temples burning. The rebellion's whispers had become shouts. Still the Eternals had power, and power is dangerous, even when faith falters. Weeks later, scouts brought grim news. The Eternals were massing for a full-scale offensive, not raids, not executions, but war. Their fleets were gathering in numbers beyond count. Harlow listened in silence as the report ended. They mean to crush us all at once. Gorlak said, end this rebellion before it grows. The council erupted in panic. Some demanded retreat into hiding, scattering. So why the Eternals could never catch them all. Others demanded a preemptive strike. Harlow stood, his voice cut through the noise. They want to wipe us out. Good. Let them come. We'll make them bleed for every inch, and when they think they've won, we'll tear their heart out. The room stilled. Doran leaned close, muttering, "That's suicide, Captain." Harlow's eyes were still but better suicide than surrender. If we die, we'll die making sure the galaxy never forgets the lie we shattered that night alone in his quarters. Harlow stared at the stars. He felt the ghosts of his crew, of Reynolds, of the Iron Rain. They whispered in silence, their eyes on him. Waiting, he whispered back, voice, one more fight, just one more, and I'll make it count. The war was no longer survival, it was destiny. The gods were coming, and humanity, scarred, broken, furious humanity, would be waiting. The galaxy held its breath. The Eternal Armada gathered like a storm. On the edge of known space, hundreds of ships, flawless and white, their engines blazing as if they carried the wrath of stars themselves. For centuries they had ruled unchallenged. For centuries their perfection had cowed the galaxy into silence. Now their silence was gone. Now their perfection was cracked, and they came, not as gods but as butchers, desperate to prove they still deserved worship. Opposite them the rebellion waited. The fleet was a ragged thing, scavenged. Freighters bristling with welded cannons, mining ships armored with plates ripped from scrapyards, fighters stitched together from junk and fury. 100 species, each carrying scars, each driven by vengeance. Their ships shook when engines burned, their weapons misfired, as often as they struck true, but their voices carried something the Eternals could never forge. Resolve. At the center of the rebel fleet, aboard the scarred flagship Bloodfang, Captain Harlow stood at the viewport. His hands rested on the railing, his jaw set. Around him, alien officers muttered prayers, sharpened blades checked weapons. Doran stood at his side, battered but grinning like a wolf, hungry for blood. They brought their whole damn empire. Doran muttered, good, saves us the trouble of hunting them down. Harlow didn't smile. His eyes never left the Eternal fleet. They think this ends today, one last slaughter to put the galaxy back in chains. And Harlow's voice was steel. Then we break the chains for good. Comms crackled with the voice of an Eternal commander, smooth, powerful, arrogant. Even now, vermin, you should have hidden in your holes. You should have begged for mercy. Instead, you brought your filth together, and now you will burn together. The rebel channels erupted in defiance. Voices in a dozen languages cursed. Mocked spat fury back at the gods. Harlow keyed his mic. His voice was low, raw, but it carried across every rebel. Ship, they call us vermin, then let's show them what happens when vermin bite. The fleet roared as one. The first volley lit the stars. Eternal lances cut through the void. Beams of pure energy slicing rebel ships apart, whole squadrons exploded in fire. Debris scattering like ashes on the wind. The rebels staggered, but they did not break. Missiles screamed back, crude and savage. Some detonated harmlessly against shields, but others punched through, tearing holes in perfect white hulls. Fire spilled into the void. Gods burned. The battle descended into chaos. Ships collided. Fighters darted between giants. Explosions stitched across the dark like lightning. The Eternals fought with elegance, every move precise there. Ships shining like blades. The rebels fought with brutality, throwing everything they had, ramming when guns failed, detonating their own cores when cornered. It was slaughter on both sides. On the Blood Fang, the bridge shook with every impact. Consoles sparked, alarms screamed, the air thick with smoke. Harlow barked orders, his voice steady, even as the ship groaned around him. Target their cruisers, break their shields, then swarm. Doran laughed through blood on his lips. We're holding, Captain. By hell, we're holding. But the truth was harsher. For every Eternal ship that fell, 10 rebels died. The fleet was bleeding faster than it could kill. Then the moment came. Hole opened in the Eternal formation. Their flagship, massive, gleaming, the size of a city, drove forward. Its lances cut swaths through the rebel lines, its presence a declaration. This was their heart, their hammer, the vessel of their new leader. Harlow's eyes narrowed. He knew what had to be done. Bring us in, he ordered. The crew stared. Gorlek snarled, that's suicide. Their guns will tear us apart. Harlow's voice was calm. Not if we get close enough. The Blood Fang surged forward, engines screaming. Eternal fire tore at its hull, ripping chunks of metal into space, bodies venting into the void. Still it came, clawing through. Fire teeth bared on the rebel channels. Voices shouted in disbelief. Then they followed. Ships battered and broken surged after the Blood Fang, swarming toward the Eternal flagship. Like wolves descending on a giant, the Eternals tried to hold formation, but the rebels were everywhere. Small ships ramming, fighters swarming, explosions chaining across their lines. The flagship's lances fired wildly, cutting down friend and foe alike. The gap closed. Inside the Eternal flagship, their new leader stood at the center of the throne chamber. His name was Sarkar, chosen to replace Vior. His armor gleamed silver, unmarred, his eyes glowing with the cruel fire of conviction. Let them come, Sarkar sneered. We will grind them into dust. Their captain will kneel before me, his head bowed in chains. The ship shook as explosions rattled its hull. Officers cried out in alarm, voices trembling, but Sarkar did not flinch. He believed still in his immortality. The Blood Fang smashed into the Eternal flagship's hull, docking clamps biting, boarding tubes locking into place. The corridors became war zones. Rebels flooded in, aliens screaming war cries, humans firing rifles, knives flashing. Eternal soldiers met them with glowing blades. The clash echoing like thunder. Blood sprayed across white walls. Smoke choked Pristine halls. Doran led the charge, shotgun blasting. Holes in armor, laughter roaring from his throat. Come on, you bastards, let's see you bleed again. Harlow followed, pistol in one hand, knife in the other. He moved like a storm, every strike precise, every shot lethal. He didn't fight for glory, he fought for every name burned into his memory. The rebels carved their way through the flagship, step by bloody step, until they reached the throne chamber. Sarkar waited, blade humming with white fire, his eyes locked on the human who dared defy him. You are the insect who killed Valor, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. You think you matter, you are nothing. One man cannot kill eternity. Harlow stepped forward, his knife gleaming red with blood. His voice was gravel. Then I'll kill it twice. They clashed. Sarkar moved with inhuman speed, his blade a blur of light. Harlow ducked, rolled, fired his pistol shots, sparking against armor. The Eternal struck back, blade grazing Harlow's arm, searing flesh. The captain gritted his teeth, lunged, knife slashing across Sarkar's chest. Golden iron sprayed, but the Eternal laughed, his strength unbroken, pathetic. You cannot kill a god. Harlow's voice was a growl. I don't need to kill a god, just a man too stupid to know he isn't one. The duel raged, brutal and raw. Sarkar's blade cut, Harlow's knife stabbed, fists slammed, blood sprayed. They tore at each other like beasts, neither giving ground. At last Sarkar raised his blade high, ready to cleave Harlow in two. Harlow lunged forward, slamming his pistol under the Eternal's chin. He pulled the trigger. The shot blew through Sarkar's skull, ichor spraying the throne in a golden fountain. The Eternal staggered, eyes wide with disbelief. No, he gurgled. I am. Harlow shoved his knife into the Eternal's heart, twisting, mortal. Sarkar collapsed, his perfect body broken, his throne drowned in blood. The battle outside shifted, word spread across Eternal channels. Their leader was dead. Their flagship was breached. The rebels roared, fighting with renewed fury. The Eternals faltered, their arrogance collapsing into panic. Ship after ship fell. Some tried to flee, but the rebels hunted them down, tearing them apart. For the first time in history, an Eternal armada was broken. The gods were dead. On the throne chamber floor, Harlow stood over Sarkar's corpse, blood dripping from his knife. Doran staggered in, soaked in gore, grinning like a madman. You did it, Doran rasped. You killed another one. Harlow didn't smile. His eyes were hollow, his voice low. Not just me, all of us, every man who died to make this possible, every world that burned. This is their victory. Outside, the Eternal flagship cracked apart, fire consuming its hull. Rebel ships pulled back, watching as the symbol of eternity burned. The galaxy would never be the same. Weeks later, across countless worlds, statues of the Eternals toppled. Chains were broken, temples destroyed. The rebellion spread like wildfire. Unstoppable now. The gods had bled, the gods had died, and no amount of fear could rebuild the lie. In hidden halls and open streets, one name was whispered with reverence: Harlow, the man who killed Immortality. On a quiet deck of the Blood Fang, Harlow stood alone, staring at the stars. War was not over. The Eternals still held worlds, still commanded fleets, but they were no longer gods. They were just men clinging to power with bloodied hands, and men could fall. Harlow whispered into the void, to the Ghosts of the Iron Rain to Reynolds. To every soldier who'd bled for this. We broke them, we in LT Unk and GT LL finished them. No. Gods, not anymore. The stars gave no answer, but for the first time they seemed less cold.